This is the story of Princess Urenica of Livivny, who was taken hostage by the large nation of Belcourt. Princess standing in the garden, waits with bated breath for Eurydion, the king of Belcourt. A handsome boy loosens his necktie and says Princess. Princess Urenica turns to look at him and immediately runs towards him. Looking at this boy while taking care of her clothes, she says, "I've been waiting for you." Princess looked at the man with a very innocent face and smiled into Calb's dad. The handsome man looked seriously at the princess. The man said, "Who's what?" The girl immediately panicked and put her hand over her mouth and said, stupid moth, dot." The girl thought to herself, "He doesn't look angry, I think," Princess said shyly, and as Eid was leaving, "I mean, Your Majesty," the princess said, "would you?" The princess, very shy, looked into the boy's eyes and said, "Would you marry me, dot?" The princess was very happy, but the boy was confused. The boy said, "Princess," wishing Eid. The boy took a step forward and the prince looked at him with a very innocent face and moist eyes and asked yes. The boy's mind was blown. The boy said, scratching his head, "I did not abduct you to marry you." The princess looked into the girl's eyes and said, "I know." Then the boy said, "If you know, why did you ask this question?" The princess thought about the boy's question and started asking herself why she had asked that. The princess's eyes suddenly lit up and she said happily, "Because I'm totally in love with you, Your Majesty." "From the moment I first saw you," the boy replied immediately. "I don't love you, princess. And more importantly, you know I am engaged." The princess started laughing with a weak laugh. Princess said to kidnapper, "But you said she wasn't your fiancé." The boy responded to this, "Well, true, I suppose it's more like she is a future candidate to become my fiancé." The princess said excitedly, "See? I know that. Who do you think you're fooling?" The princess clasped both their hands together and said, "Yes. I suppose there's no knowing what the future brings. However, do you love Lady Elodia, Your Majesty?" The princess replied to kidnapper, "Then why won't you give me a chance?" The kidnapper looked over at the princess and asked, "Is there a reason that I should?" Tears started to fall from the princess's eyes and she said, "Because like you." Kidnapper said thoughtfully, I don't know if that's true." The princess said very enthusiastically, "I said I like you. I even said I love you. What other reason do you need?" The princess made a tempting offer to lure him into her trap and said, "If you marry me, you'll gain a lot more than if you married Lady Elodia." The kidnapper immediately questioned him. For example, the princess said, "I hold the title for the western region of Livivny, the breadbasket of our country. I'm sure you know of that region's reputation as land blessed by the goddess." Kidnapper replied, "Belcourt also has plenty of fertile lands." Princess Name lured the kidnapper a little more and said, "And, as the much-beloved youngest princess, my father will give you a handsome dowry. So much that you'll be unable to refuse." The kidnapper asked, "Is a princess of Livivny actually concerned about the state coffers of Belcourt?" The princess gave him another offer to take him into her confidence. "If you marry me, my father will immediately open up Gluckman Road." But the kidnapper was also a clever man. He immediately replied to the princess, "Gluckman Road? I have a feeling he'll open the road soon, even if I don't marry you." Even if I don't marry you. None of the princess's tricks were successful. There was a sharp-witted man at the kidnapping. He understood the princess's trick and said, "It's moments like this that make me feel sad. My country is small." When none of the princess's tricks were successful, she started crying loudly and said in frustration, "If only he knew why I was doing this. He'd accept my proposal on the spot. I'm trying to save you here." Because the princess knew the whole truth, she said, "If you marry Lady Elodia, a horrible villain will be born. That woman will raise your son to follow the evil path of dark magic, and as the father of the villain, you'll be murdered by your own son when you turn 40. Then, the princess thought to herself, "But if I say that, he'll either interrogate me to find out how I knew those things, or he'll think I'm insane." Then the princess turned around and said angrily, "I really didn't want to have to do this." "But," the princess asked the man very enthusiastically, "don't you think I'm pretty?" But the man was not ready to accept anything, so he immediately said, "I don't know." "I'm not as you are hearing this from this man." The princess was shocked because she had no expectations of this. the princess asked hesitantly. What? After hearing such a great proposal, the man felt a little confused and started thinking and said, I've never seen a proposal like this, so it's refreshing, but I wish you'd understand that I have no intention of marrying you, princess. The man put his eyes in the princess's eyes and ate them. I'm not the type to get married if there's no love. The princess was completely surprised by what the man said and asked the man, Dude, you just said you don't love Lady Elodia. Kidnapper was a little shocked and said, And now? I want to try loving her the best I can. The princess was very angry that her trick had failed and asked in surprise, What? The man said to the princess, I'll return you to Olivni as soon as the king opens access to Glovman Road. After all this, the man said goodbye to the princess and left. But the princess was not one to give up. She thought to herself with great anger, Put up all the walls you want, but I won't give up so easily. Yes, you must be wondering why the princess is doing this. Because there's a reason why I'm trying so hard to make the king of Belcourt marry me. I was actually transported to the world of a web novel *. I was Ari at the same time. I'm trying to save myself from my own character's fate of dying within 5 years after her body reacts badly to magic. Odding, specifically 20 years before the main story takes place. I'm trying to stop the birth of the novel's villain and the tragedy that's about to befall the characters. The only person who can save me is King Eurydion, the king who is descended from a god. But he totally rejected me. My desperate attempts to save the both of us from becoming tragic supporting characters begins with the villain's father turning me down with no hesitation. Darisha and Princess are sitting at a table on a cloudy day, talking to each other. The Eurenica asks the girl sitting at the table in front of him, What are you going to name her, Teresa? Eurenica says this while holding the teacup in her hand. Duke Levon already has a name, I bet. What did he say? Darisha goes into thought for a while, then puts her hand to her lips and says the child's name. Bridget. As soon as Eurenica hears the baby's name, she starts coughing and remembers something and then says, That's a pretty name. Darisha gets worried. She thinks maybe I didn't name the baby correctly, and then she asks, Doesn't it sound like a good name? Eurenica replies from the front, It's cute. Eurenica calls the baby's name very seriously, then she sees her face in her teacup and thinks. That confirmed everything, that I was in the world of. Bridget wants to be happy. A web novel I was reading in my world before I died. A message appears on the girl's mobile phone. Bridget wants to be happy 93. Hearing all this, Darisha becomes very upset and starts crying. Then suddenly Eurenica remembers something. The protagonist of that web novel. And then Eurenica starts telling her story and said I first woke up in this body around 8 months ago. When I opened my eyes I had skin white as snow, fluffy light pink hair like sweet cotton candy, and clear pale blue eyes. I was a total beauty. Is this really me? Was I just talking in a strange language? I couldn't believe it myself. Then the door bursts open and a beautiful girl walks in and says, Your Highness, did something happen? Eurenica shouts in concern and asks what you said, Your Highness? Then Darisha came to me and, encouraging me, asked me, I heard you scream. You scared me. Are you sick or something? I asked her what? Darisha responded to my behavior and said, Come on, why? Don't look at me like a stranger. That's when I met my so-called sister. I was very worried after seeing all this. I asked my sister, Are those maid costumes? Darisha replied to this, Really, what happened? I was so confused I said nothing and think about it seriously. What the heck is happening right now? I asked Darisha again. Who are you? And where am I? Upon hearing this question, Drish was completely stunned and his mouth fell open. Darisha started shouting loudly and said, Your Majesty. Get the king, no, the royal physician. Yenny, what are you saying? The princess has lost her memory. The king and the queen immediately arrived there. The queen held my hand in hers and said, Eurenica? Oh dear Yenny. Do you not remember your own mother? Some people showed up saying they're my parents. They are talking to each other, and said, What are we going to do with that girl? Do you want to take care of her? As you know, I have a family of my own to take care of. But I don't really have anyone I can call family. I was very worried and confused. I was very worried and confused. Strange questions were running through my mind. What is this place? Where the heck did I end up? I thought I'd died in that accident. I was very worried, and I was on the bus, sitting by the window, reading this very web novel. Then, the whole bus suddenly lurched. And with a huge crash, I lost consciousness. And I woke up here. I was grateful enough to still be alive. But a princess? And a pretty one? Eurenica was very worried, and she was thinking. But something feels off. It feels kind of like déjà vu. I was thinking that this place should be unfamiliar to me, but strangely, it's like I've heard of all of this before. Suddenly, a boy's voice, "Stay," rang in his ears. When he saw it, a boy was sitting on his knees saying, "Princess! I am Fernando Cardona, your personal guard." Hearing all this, I was stunned and my eyes widened. Eurenica asked the boy, What did you say your name was?" "The handsome boy," replied Fernando Cardona, "Your Royal Highness." Upon hearing this name, the Eurenica was stunned and began to say, "Cardona. I've definitely heard that name before." And then she remembered something he had read on his mobile. Seeing Princess thinking like this, Fernando Cardona looked at him with questioning eyes. Eurenica laughed loudly and said, "It couldn't be." Eurenica was very surprised, and then she said, "There's no way." "Cardona? I see." My imagination's running wild. It seemed like Eurenica was starting to understand something. She said, "I did see that name before. But where?" And then suddenly she remembered and she shouted, "In a web novel!" Eurenica was very worried. She put her hand over her eyes and started asking questions. "Do you have a son? Or a brother?" "There's one person I know with the name Cardona." The character from the novel came to her mind and she said, "He was the male protagonist of the web novel I was reading before I died. The heart-stoppingly handsome knight. Alexio Lazzaro Cardona." The servant smiled and replied to Eurenica, "A son? Your Highness, I'm not married yet, and I'm an only child." Eurenica was surprised and thinking. Familiar words. And names. And no wonder they all sounded so familiar. Eurenica understood everything now. She was muttering under her breath due to worry and saying, "These are all from the web novel. Bridget wants to be happy. Am I really in that world?" After understanding everything, Eurenica began to think in her mind. "And from what I can tell, I'm currently in the story before the main characters are born." Seeing the princess so upset, the security guard asked, "Are you all right, Princess Eurenica?" The girl's eyes widened. She wanted to ask something. "Wait, doesn't this novel begin?" Eurenica's eyes widened. She wanted to ask something. "Wait, doesn't this novel begin with my sister Teresa being kidnapped while she's pregnant?" Eurenica said very cleverly, "That's right. Unluckily, it seems, I managed to be transported to this world right when the Fletcher's misfortunes are set into motion." Eurenica was lying upside down on the bed, punching the bed hard and saying, "And away, and away. This is nonsense. Seriously. This is insane. None of this makes any sense at all." Eurenica took a deep breath and thought, "But how the heck did I end up in another person's body?" Strangely, I feel like all the pieces are coming together now. Eurenica was unable to accept this fact because she knew what was going to happen next. On the continent of Ryger, there's a large neighboring country that could easily crush our small nation. That would be the powerhouse of the East, Belcourt. A thought came to the Eurenica's mind. In the story, it's the great king of Belcourt who kidnaps my older sister, Teresa. He invades Livivny, abducts Teresa, and holds her against her will. It's absolutely despicable. Thinking about this, Eurenica became even more worried. But if you read the novel, he's actually a character you feel bad for. That's because he meets an unfortunate end when he's tragically killed. Eurenica was crying and thinking in her mind. That's why I bawled my eyes out when his character died. Eurenica was crying a lot and was now very angry with the writer. She was thinking, how can you take him away like that? Princess was still very upset. She was crying with her head in her arms and saying, "But I'm still scared. Am I scared because he's the ruler of a powerful nation? Or am I scared because this fictional character is suddenly real?" Because Eurenica knew Teresa's kidnapping is the opening act of the original story. Princess was just worried because it's also the beginning of the disastrous events that befall the generation of the main character's parents. Because there is a passionate, yet strange love story about a princess and her guard. Bridget wants to be happy. The web novel I'm now living in has 3 main characters. Number 1, the female protagonist is Bridget, the delighter of Princess Teresa of Livevny. Number 2, the male protagonist is Bridget's guard, Alexio. And finally, there's the villain, the tyrannical King DeKalb de Belcourt. In Bridget Wants to Be Happy, the main plot revolves around the 2 protagonists healing the traumas of their sad childhood. In other words, their parents' generation was doomed. We're not just talking about a few bad things happening, Urenica was thinking while holding the pillow in her arms. They were all doomed to die young. From the kidnapping in the opening, they'd already lost all chance of living anything close to an eventful life. Thinking about these things, she became even more worried. On the other side, Teresa received a letter whose eyes filled when she read Bridget's father, Duke Levon, dies in battle trying to get his pregnant wife back. Teresa receives this news while in a country far from home and collapses from the shock. This results in Bridget's premature birth. Weeks ahead of the anticipated date, talks between Belcourt and Livevny break down, so Bridget and her mother are sent back to Livevny when Bridget is 10 years old. And DeKalb is heartbroken and enraged at Bridget leaving. Urenica was sitting, thinking about something, stressing her mind. DeKalb Belcourt. The full name's so long, so I always forget it. Anyway, he begins to use black magic, becoming a villain who can manipulate the souls of the dead in hell. A year after Bridget leaves, when DeKalb turns 11, he kills his own father, the King of Belcourt, by using him as a sacrifice in a magic ritual, all because he wanted to become king so he could take over Livevny and regain Bridget. When the girl found out that the stories she had read had turned into reality, she felt some very bad things and was thinking in her mind, I feel so bad for DeKalb's dad. No, he's still scary. Meanwhile, Teresa returns to her home country, but dies from a plague 2 years later. That's already 3 people dead in this story. It's truly dreadful. Urenica was sitting there thinking about all these things with worry. There's Theresia, her husband, Duke Levon, and DeKalb's father, the current king of Belcourt. And finally, thinking about all these things, she stopped for a moment. Then she remembered. Fernando, the father of Alexio and my guard, loses an eye and a leg in the war. At this point, the character's parents' generation is laid to waste by tragedy after tragedy. In comparison, the story of the web novel is a refreshing coming-of-age tale about 2 characters healing from this past. A totally sweet romance story. Urenica said to Teresa with her moist eyes, if I was still reading the web novel, I could dismiss this all as some sad backstory. Teresa was shocked to hear all this and said, living witness of what's to come. But shockingly enough, it's now reality. The real me has to be lying in denial. In a hospital bed in a coma right now from the accident. Or maybe I was abducted by aliens. At first, I didn't accept this as reality. But I can't escape the truth anymore. I'm living a second life. All these things were on the Urenica's mind. Then suddenly a thought came to the Urenica's mind. Teresa's far along in her pregnancy, which means Belcourt will come barging in any time now. As soon as this thought came to the Urenica's mind, she started staring at Teresa sitting in front of her. Seeing Urenica staring at him, Teresa asked, Urenica, why are you staring at me like that? Urenica replied, what? Nothing. Teresa said it in a very innocent way. You're making me feel self-conscious. Urenica said it's just a little hard to accept. Urenica made a very innocent face and said with a fake smile, that little Bridget will be born soon. Urenica slapped the paper hard and said excitedly, yeah, I can't just sit here and do nothing. Because the Urenica had already read the whole story to her, she decided to write down what she remembered on a piece of paper and then change the story. She said, who else can do something about this besides me? I know everything about this story. I'll do whatever it takes to stop this tragedy from happening. Urenica planned to be the first to stop Belcourt from invading Livevny. Let's break down the cause and effect. Why does Belcourt invade Livevny? Urenica put her head on the table in frustration because she couldn't remember why does Belcourt invade Livevny. I hit a block already. It's not like the parents' stories are all that detailed in the web novel. She was sitting there thinking about all this. She only remembered one thing. Livevny refused to fulfill the conditions of an agreement first, and this obviously angered the king of Belcourt. Yes, she was stressing her mind and thinking that so what in the world was the agreement? Fernando asked. Princess Urenica, is something the matter? You don't look too well. The girl raised her head while sitting on the chair and looked at the Fernando. Fernando said, I'm worried about your right leg and left eye. Urenica pointed with her hand and said to Fernando, never mind. It's nothing. Fernando said, alright, making an innocent face. Urenica said, it's not like you'd understand. I mean, how could you understand? The girl said, attaching the paper to her face. Hey, Ferdy. The girl asked Fernando, did Livevny and Belcourt sign any kind of treaty or agreement? Fernando was surprised to hear this and started asking with Belcourt. Are you speaking of the Gluckman Treaty? Urenica was very surprised and asked excitedly, the Gluckman Treaty? Teresa, Urenica, Fernando Cardona. Urenica asked, did you say the Gluckman Treaty? Looking at the Fernando. Fernando replied with a smile and said, in exchange for Livevny opening access to Gluckman Road, Belcourt promised to provide lease with magical ori from Ezekian. Urenica was very happy upon hearing this, and said the Gluckman Treaty. I'm pretty sure I read that when the characters of the original novel talk about what was going on between the countries. Urenica understood another part of the story and said angrily, so that means the king of Livevny broke the agreement first? The king who is now my dad. Bold moves for the king of a small country. I got it. I just need to make sure he upholds the treaty. As soon as she thought about this, she understood what he had to do now, and she said, I got it. I just need to make sure he upholds the treaty. Urenica immediately ran away from there. Fernando said from behind. Why, Your Highness? Where are you going? Fernando tried to stop Urenica, but she loudly said sorry Ferd and left. I think I have no choice but to become the hidden hero who saves this kingdom. Thinking this, she opened the door loudly and said, Father. Urenica's father, who is a king, said Urenica, sweetie. The king was suddenly shocked and said to her, what brings you running? Urenica shouted loudly and said, Father, ablet the Gluckman Treaty. Suddenly, Urenica realized she had done something wrong. The girl then held her father's hand in a very innocent way and said, Dad. She know her father's weakness, her sweet cuteness, so time to turn on the charm. When the girl called out to her father so cutely, her father answered, Yes, sweetheart, she innocently said about the Gluckman Treaty. Hearing this, the king started thinking. Then the Urenica said, Tchiglckmhntrety. The king said, Oh, that? King said, it'll just give you a headache. Now and no need to worry your pretty little head over complicated matters of state, sweetheart. Urenica got very angry after hearing this, and started thinking in her heart, what the heck is that crap supposed to mean? Then Urenica, with a little hesitation, said to her father, You're not thinking of doing anything funny, are you? What? Do you mean anything funny, Urenica? Upon hearing this, the king immediately asked his daughter, What do you mean anything flinny, Urenica? Urenica started trembling after hearing her father's words. Fairer. When the girl saw her plan going awry, she shouted loudly. Urenica said 3 hours later, I can't believe it. The girl was worried and asked her father, So you're telling me you closed off Gluckman Road? For 2 years. Urenica was very upset after hearing all this because she knew Belcourt does not produce magical ori, but they need it for the capital city and to protect the borders. Therefore, trade with ori-rich Ezekian is necessary. That's why Belcourt, which is located in the east, did everything to secure rights to use Gluckman Road, which is the quickest way to Ezekian. Recently, Ezekian discovered a large amount of magical ore and trade between the two countries exploded. With this development, her father became greedy. The king was lost in thought. He wondered if he play his cards right, he can easily make a lot of money. After thinking for a while, the king said, Let's change the conditions of the treaty. The cost for allowing access to Gluckman Road isn't just a set amount of magical ori, but 10% of the entire amount traded. Urenica was very angry when she did not succeed in her goal, and she started telling her father. You're a total bully. For the past 50 years, Livni received 100 magic ores per payment. He's now basically demanding 1,000 with no prior agreement, she said with a sad face. Aren't you afraid of Belcourt retaliating? On top of that, you closed access for 2 whole years? Eurenica did not listen to his daughter and encouraged her by saying, Eurenica, and no matter how much of a powerhouse Belcourt is, we're all part of the Figer peace treaty, so there's no way he'll attack us. Eurenica shouted loudly and said to her father, so you're the reason why the peacekeeper of this continent, Belcourt, lost patience. Are you really not going to reopen Gluckman Road? The king said, why should I, sweetheart? She became very angry at not being able to achieve her goal and said in hushed words, Argh. Is this guy for real? Eurenica was walking around the garden anxiously, telling Teresa we failed before we even had a chance to get started. After telling all this, the girl took a deep breath. Teresa said, looking at her sister. Eurenica? Teresa felt something was wrong, so she asked, Eurenica, is something wrong? You're sighing so. Eurenica said. I sighed again. While saying this, she suddenly stopped and said, no, nothing's wrong. Teresa asked if anything's bothering you. You have to tell me. Eurenica replied, it's nothing. Because she don't want to release any concerns while Teresa's pregnant. Teresa said to Eurenica, whatever happens, you can count on your big sister. I'll do anything to help my why. Hearing Teresa's words, the Eurenica said, Teresa, you're an angel. Seeing so much love for herself in her sister's heart, tears welled up in Eurenica's eyes and she said to her sister, no, you count on me. I'll make sure nothing happens to you, Teresa. Something came to the Eurenica's mind and she said, I guess I have to resort to Plan B. Plan B, stop the king of Belcourt from abducting Teresa. The girl thought to herself. If I can't stop the invasion, I can at least keep her from being taken. But when exactly does Belcourt invade? Duke Levin's castle. Fernando said to Eurenica. What in the world are you doing here? Why aren't you at the palace? Duke Levin's younger brother and Eurenica's childhood friend, Sergei Levin. Eurenica was thinking while hugging the pillow after hearing this. Eurenica asked the boy a question while smiling. Do you have any idea all the things going on in my mind? Fernando replied, no, I doubt you have much going on in there. Eurenica sadly. The only way for me to prepare for the future. And as soon as she said this, Eurenica threw her pillow at the Fernando with force. She also said to stay by Teresa's side and protect her, so I had no choice. A few days ago. The girl remembered something and said, a few days ago. When does Belcourt invade? I swear I read it. Eurenica said, it's not like I could keep Teresa at the palace, she's a married woman. Fernando replied to this, not that you were ever really ladylike, but while we've been acting out of control the past few months. Eurenica said, the people around me haven't noticed anything's off. Fernando said jokingly to the Eurenica. Who'd believe that you're a princess? She replied with a smile. If you don't shut up, I'll make you. Yes, the girl thought to herself. So luckily, Eurenica and I must have similar personalities. Then suddenly a thought occurred to her, and she said, why couldn't I have become some random, nameless background character? Eurenica said, if I knew this would happen, I would have paid more attention to the background's story. Fernando asked, is something really the matter? Eurenica was lying face down on the bed, her face buried in the pillow. Eurenica lifted himself up from the pillow and said, Scr, promise him. When the time comes, you have to come save me. Fernando was surprised to hear this and started asking, why would I have to come save you? And there's Sir Cardona. Eurenica replied to this. A time will come when you'll have to. Because that's exactly what happens in the first scene of the novel. Eurenica, we have to go. Let go, sir. What about Teresa? One of the few scenes that Eurenica appears in. As this scene from the story came to his mind, he said to himself again. All I have to do is make sure Teresa hides somewhere. Of course, I have to hide someplace safe too, but Fernando asked after hearing this. In case things go wrong, Eurenica said, I'm counting on you, Sergei. You have to come for me. Fernando said while looking at Eurenica. There you go, saying strange things again. Eurenica started laughing after hearing this. Eurenica said laughingly. But there was one thing I forgot. The king of Belcourt would abduct a princess. And Teresa wasn't the only princess of Livivny. Urenica asked her sister what did the royal physician say. Teresa replied he said there's nothing to worry about. Hearing this, Urenica felt a little relieved and said, "Oh, that's good to hear." Urenica was very nervous and was saying to herself, what's this bad feeling that suddenly came over me? Maybe I'm just sensitive from being on guard the past few days. Then Urenica answered her own questions and said, but something's making me really nervous about today. The king and Teresa were sitting at the dining table in the living room, talking. The king said to his daughter, make sure you look at and listen to good things for the baby. While Urenica was thinking about something else, she was telling herself, I'm nervous. I'm super nervous. Yep, definitely nervous. Suddenly the Urenica slammed her hand on the table and stood up, saying to herself, I gotta do something. Thinking this, Urenica immediately went and grabbed her sister's hand and started lifting her from the chair. She said, Teresa, let's go back. You shouldn't be outside for too long. The king and queen looked at Urenica worriedly and said, but why and why? We've barely been here for 2 hours. Urenica replied to this 2 hours is more than enough. The king questioned Urenica about this strange behavior. What's wrong? The girl replied, laughing with a fake smile, and said Teresa gets tired easily if she's out and about too long. I'll get you home. Let's go. Seeing Urenica doing this, her sister was also worried and she was looking at her with questioning eyes. Before that, Teresa would say something. Urenica herself spoke up and said, Oh, dear. I thought you were all right, Teresa. Urenica managed to take her sister away and said as she left, you should all stay in the palace today. Promise. At this king replied, get home safe. A loud noise echoed in the palace. Find her. Something strange was happening in the palace. Seeing all this happening, Teresa asked, what's going on? Urenica shouted loudly and said, No. Is it the Belcourt army? There was a loud noise coming from the palace. We're under attack, the girl said in a state of distress. I should look into becoming a fortune teller. Teresa was very nervous and she was asking her sister why. What is this? Urenica immediately ran away to save her sister and said, there's no time. This way, Teresa called out to her sister in great fear and said, Urenica. Because Urenica had read the story before, she knew what was going to happen next, so she was thinking as she ran away. I need to hurry up and hide her. Teresa was very worried. She was running away from there and was telling her sister, Yenny! Urenica, please. Mother and father are they'll be fine. Urenica replied, they'll be fine. Urenica said, indeed. In the story, absolutely nothing happens to them. King Eurydion takes Teresa and leaves. While saying this, Urenica found a place to hide her sister. She said to her sister, go in here. This is the secret passage that Bridget discovers as a kid. See the small knob sticking out of the floor? When the soldiers come in here, quickly press that. Then you'll slide all the way down to the basement. The girl was very upset and started crying loudly and asking her sister, there's no way the both of us are fitting in there. Urenica didn't listen to her and said, stay in there and don't come out. The girl was crying a lot, tears were flowing from her eyes. While crying, she asked her sister, at least explain what's going on. What is this all about? Urenica thought happily, well, I'll just have Tio go find the second secret passage. Suddenly, Urenica saw something and said, I'll do that later. Urenica said encouragingly to Teresa, just worry about Bridget right now. Urenica pushed the bookcase hard, blocking the way while Teresa was calling her name. I need to hurry before the soldiers rush in. Thinking this, Urenica completely blocked that path. There was a small gap in the bookcase where the Teresa could see out. Her sister said, you keep looking out of here. There. Now Teresa is safe. Thinking this, Urenica said, I'll see you later. The palace had been attacked. The soldiers were fighting in the palace and Urenica was thinking, no. They're already in here. Seeing all this, Urenica hid herself and started thinking, holy crap, this is totally serious. It's scarier than I thought it'd be. Urenica was very scared. Sitting there, Urenica decided that I need to go to the east wing of the palace if I want to get to that second secret passage. Then suddenly the Urenica thought, wait, should I even go there? Or should I just wait here for Sergei? Then the girl thought, what could Sergei possibly do to save me? He doesn't know where I am. Late in the game, she realized that breaking from the original plot means she can't trust things to work out like it did in the web novel. After thinking about all this, she decided, it's not that far. I should just make a run for it. Urenica looked around and started thinking, alright. And no one's looking. Urenica lifted her dress with both hands and ran away. King of Belcourt was watching the soldiers standing far away fighting among themselves. His eyes were searching for someone. As soon as the Urenica ran away, the king saw her. Urenica was running away from there very carefully. She was thinking, I don't think anyone's looking now. But the king had seen it. When Urenica realized that someone was watching her, she hid herself behind a pillar. Urenica was very nervous and started thinking while placing both her hands over her mouth, what? How long was he looking? The king walked slowly to the pillar, and the girl sat there peacefully. Urenica had both her hands over her mouth, and she was thinking, Sergei, now would be a good time for you to come save me. Show lip. The king placed his hand on the pillar, and the girl was very nervous. The king looked at the girl and said, shiny silver hair, pink hair, and light blue eyes. And red bedroom eyes. Got you, Princess Urenica of Livovny. This was the king of Belcourt. The girl shouted loudly and said, no. Sergei, you jerk. When the Urenica's eyes opened, she heard a noise. The king of Belcourt was carrying the Urenica on his shoulder. The girl's head was hanging down, tears were coming out of her eyes, and she was speaking. Why is the ground above my head and the sky below my feet? 1 brick, 2 brick, Fernando screamed loudly and said, Princess Urenica, unhand the princess, you brute! And he ran to save the Urenica. The king was not alone. He had some soldiers with him. As Fernando moved forward, the king kicked him hard in the stomach. After that, king said, Tsk, such a nuisance. Urenica was shouting very loudly and saying, Agh, my stomach. Urenica shouted to the king, I said I wanted to stop Teresa's abduction, not take her place. Sergei got up again and ran towards the king, shouting to save the princess. Urenica called as Sergei loudly and said, what took you so long? You big Gr. Sergei attacked the king with a sword, and this attack by Sergei was also of no use because the king was an expert swordsman. King of Belcourt was still holding the Urenica on his shoulder. She cried and said, excuse me. Urenica shouted again loudly and said, excuse me? Mr. Belcourt, sir? After hearing the Urenica's words, the king stopped for a moment and said, Heu, Urenica requested the king, could you put me down, please? After listening to Urenica, the king of Belcourt said, you want me to let you go? Urenica said, crying, I'm not even asking for that. I just want to be put down. I'll walk on my own 2 feet. Oof. Or could you at least hold me right side UIP? The king did not listen to Urenica and said, it's just that. HNGH, Urenica innocently requested and said, it really hurts. It hurts. Your armor hurts. The king made the Urenica sit on the horse. She was very scared to see the horse, and she could not even speak properly, and was saying, HH horse? The king forced the Urenica's head against the neck of a horse. She was very scared and cried, saying, what's happening? Put me down. I'm scared. The king held the Urenica by the hand on her shoulder. Urenica's hands were in the air. She was feeling scared and she started saying gasp. If I fall, the king said while holding the Urenica, keep your back straight and lean against me. Urenica asked hesitantly, like this. The king replied to this, yes, like that. The king, addressing the soldiers with him, said, Army of Belcourt, we ride. The king pulled the reins of his horse. The horse lifted both its front legs in the air and the king rode away. The king kidnapped the Urenica and was riding away with his soldiers at high speed, and he said to the girl, we'll pass through the magic circle. Don't fall behind. Urenica was a little shocked to hear this and said, a magic circle? Suddenly, a sphere of light appeared. The brightness of this circle was very high. The Urenica was unable to open her eyes, so she put her hands over her eyes, and the king shouted loudly to his soldiers. Don't stop. Keep going. We won't stop until we're on Belcourt's soil. Saying this, The king and his soldiers entered this magical circle. A masked man said to the king, "I no idea her Sadi wouldn't take to magic this strongly." After listening, that prince replied, "So, you're saving you can't wake her up." After a while, the Eurenika's eyes opened and she said, "It's all so noisy." Hearing the girl's voice, the king and the man who was with him started talking among themselves. The king addressed Eurenika and said, "You're awake." She thought Choi, a hot guy. Eurenika was very happy to see the king and she was thinking, a hot guy talked to me. King said, "Princess." Eurenika said, "My eyes are pleased." Seeing this strange behavior of the girl, the king asked the man who was standing with him, "Is something terribly wrong with her?" This man said to the king, "Allow me to examine her, your majesty." That man was a magician. He said to the princess, "Your highness, if you'll pardon me." Suddenly, a magic circle appeared on the magician's hand. Eurenika was feeling nauseous. Eurenika held her head and said, "What this? Did I get motion sickness?" Hearing this, the old man said to the princess, "One moment, your highness." The old man placed his hand on the princess's head and began to cast a spell. The princess forcefully pushed the old man's hand aside. Eurenika shouted loudly and said, "It feels like my head's going to explode. It hurts. It's torture." The old man was unable to handle the new princess and he began to say, "Please, someone. Anyone, help me." The princess held the foot of the prince. The prince immediately placed his hand on the princess's hand. As soon as the prince placed his hand on the princess's hand, the princess felt relieved. The king was surprised to see all this and said, "What?" The pain disappeared. The king asked the princess in surprise, "Princess, are you all right?" Teresa, Eurenika, Fernando Cardona, King of Belcourt, Sergei. Eurenika was lying face down on the ground, crying, and said, "I'm all right." Eurenika said, crying, "What the heck?" Eurenika was lying on the ground and she started crying and saying, "I was on full alert the past few days to protect Teresa. Only Tio and Lip kidnapped and slung around like a sack. And then I was on a galloping horse. And I've never even been on a horse. Then I was tormented by a pain I never felt before in my life. If I knew all of this would have happened." "Because that's what makes it even sadder," the king said, "Princess. No. I still would have done all of this again." Saying this, she started crying loudly. Eurenika was crying a lot and saying, "If you couldn't get my sister, why didn't you just go home? Why'd you have to take me?" "You mean it? Horrible," the girl thought. On top of that, of all the things to grab, why'd I grab his foot? The king lifted the Eurenika up from the ground with both his hands, encouraging her. As soon as king lifted the Eurenika up, the princess's gaze fell on the king's face and she remained staring. Eurenika said, "So handsome." Prince asked, "What are you so sad about?" The king lifted the princess off the ground. Eurenika was now in the air and she let out a cold sigh. The king made the Eurenika sit on a cloth. When the Eurenika's eyes fell on the cloth, she said, "Belcourt's flag?" The king encouraged the princess and said, "I did not know you were sensitive to magic." "I'm sorry. Did it hurt a lot?" Eurenika said slowly. "Why yes," Prince said, "and for the sudden abduction. Seems like it was quite the shock." Eurenika replied, "This is humiliating." The princess pulled the handkerchief from the king's hand and said, "I'll do it. But what was the pain I felt earlier?" "The," Eurenika said, wiping her mouth with the handkerchief, "not that I feel it anymore." "So," the king asked the Eurenika, "were you sensitive around magic or magical ores before?" Princess said, "I have no idea." "A magic sensitivity?" the king asked, looking at the Eurenika, and asked, "You don't know?" Eurenika replied tremblingly, "I've never had something like this happen before, though when I say before, I mean just the past 8 months that I know of." When the old man said something, the king looked at him and asked, "Rolf, what happened?" Eurenika asked, "The guy who touched me before?" At this Rolf said, "One moment, your highness." Eurenika said, "The pain got worse after that man touched me." "I know it," Rolf said. "If someone is more sensitive to magic than the average person, something like this can easily happen." "If someone is more sensitive to magic than the average person, something like this can easily happen. Could the person with the sensitivity not know about it?" "Maybe if one grew up in an environment with little to no exposure to magic," the girl asked Rolf. "What are you looking at?" The king, after hearing all this, asked Rolf. Then why is she fine again? Rolf replied, I'm not quite sure myself, Your Majesty. Roll was a little restless and he began to say attentively, I'm not quite sure myself, Your Majesty. King of Belcourt said, I see. Anyhow, I guess this means it's impossible Tio leaves a magic circle again. The king stood up and said to his soldiers, We've crossed the border, so from this point on we go by horse. After that, King said to Eurenica, You also seemed unfamiliar with horse riding. The princess replied nervously, I can ride a horse. The king said to the princess, You look too scared to be saying that. Eurenica said, I can't ride one on my own, but for some reason I feel like I'm being a huge bother. The princess shouted and said, Wait, hold up, I'm the one who's kidnapped here. Why am I worried about bothering the kidnapper? The king replied to the princess, Then you'll come with me. King of Belcourt said, If we ride all day. De Calbas, a character, easily became obsessive because he felt deprived of love and affection. I thought his father would be a lot colder. The king took the Eurenica's hand and lifted her up from the ground, and the Eurenica thanked the king. The princess started mumbling after seeing the king. Eurenica asked the king a question. In the novel he's the guy who kept Teresa captive for 10 years. King said, Once I reach a settlement with Livni. Until then, I'll guarantee your safety and comfort. I swear on the name of Belcourt. The girl thought to herself, This is a man who will be brutally slaughtered by his own son before he turns 40. The princess said, squeezing her handkerchief, This is probably what it feels like. To be the only person in this world who knows how his life will end. The king asked the Eurenica, So may I request your cooperation, princess? Eurenica replied, I feel a similar sense of responsibility that I did for Teresa. Hearing the princess's words, the king replied, Tcholgh. There's not much I can do if this comes across as a threat. Eurenica started thinking, now that I think about it, I don't even know this man's name because he doesn't appear in the novel. Eurenica said, Mr. Dad? Father of? The king asked. Father. The girl hesitantly asked, May I ask for your name, Sir? The king said in hushed words, Eurydion. Eurenica, mumble Eurydion. The king gave his full name, Eurydion Lola Solda de Belcourt. Eurenica said, As you already might know, I'm Eurenica Sophia Livovny. Eurenica said with a smile, Nice to meet you. The king was riding a horse with his army, and the princess was sitting on the horse in front of the king. The king noticed that the princess was not sitting still, so he said to the princess, Relax your body, princess. If you keep your upper body too stiff, your back will hurt. Eurenica replied, No, it doesn't hurt at all. Before getting on the horse, the Eurenica said to the king, Did he take his armor off? Because I whined about how much it hurt, but it is a bit more comfortable. Without the armor, our bodies are too close together. I can feel his tight muscles through his clothes. And with this movement, I'm feeling everything too well. All this was going on in the Eurenica's mind. Eurenica was single her whole life because she's shy, also. Does his guy not sweat? He smells clean and cool. I think it's actually making me feel better. Eurenica was very happy, and she was thinking, It's almost like I feel energized. My God. The girl was very happy. Eurenica was saying to herself out of joy, I had no idea I was such a thirsty woman. Suddenly the Eurenica started falling forward, trembling. The king took care of the Eurenica. King of Belcourt said, Sit still, princess. Yep. This all feels too embarrassing. Eurenica fainted, thinking this. A few hours later the princess had fallen to the ground and some people were standing there watching her from above. Eurenica's head was hurting again, she said while crying. Now what's going on? The thought. How strange. King of Belcourt said, Isn't she a little too sensitive, Rolf? At this rate, I'm gonna die before I get to save the villain's dad. Eurenica thought, At this rate, I'm gonna die before I get to save the villain's dad. Rolf said, All I did was start a fire. Eurenica said, This is already the third time I had this strange reaction. First, when we went through the magic circle. Once, when they tried to use healing magic on me. And just now. All Rolf did was leave magic to start a fire for the camp. Suddenly, Eurenica felt as if she had died. Rolf, it seems that the princess is a person unadapted to magic. King's surprise and asked, Unadapted to magic? Rolf said yes. It's very rare, But every now and then there are humans who are liable to physically or mentally handle magic. Rolf also said maybe if one grew up in an environment with little to and no exposure to magic. To be someone who has not been exposed to magic in this world where magic exists, obviously, can also be interpreted as me not being a person of this world. Suddenly, a soul came out of Yurnika's body and she said, I may be wearing Yurnika's body, but I'm still a Linsa Suh. King of Belcourt said, however, what I don't understand the most in this situation is. Refrain from using magic for now, Rolf. It seems he can't handle even the smallest of magic spells, so be careful. Yurenica said, why, this is the first time I've even seen a mage since I first came to this world. Compared to Belcourt, Livivny is a weak country. The girl asked the king a question. My body rejects magic. And that's the kind of kingdom I'm being taken top, no joke, but I might actually, could you just knock me out instia just drop dead? Saying this, Yurenica started crying. King of Belcourt said, what? Just whap, a real quick one in the back of the head. You should be able to quickly make it to the palace while I'm out. Yurenica advised the king, just whap, a real quick one in the back of the head. You should be able to quickly make it to the palace while I'm out. The king held the Yurenica by the hands and asked, so, you want me to hit you? Yurenica said, at least that pain is momentary. It'd be nice to open my eyes and be in a bed. The king replied sadly, I reject your request. King said, I won't allow the mistreatment of another kingdom's royalty. Yurenica said, crying, why do you have to be such a considerate kidnapper? Rolf said, that guy over there has an arm that's sliced open, and look at that guy's leg. You can't even light a fire without magic. That means we can't eat, and you can't heal them either. King to Yurenica said, and I cannot continue to detain you any longer. Yurenica said, if you feel bad about raising your hand to me, you could just go through a magic circle like before. I'll probably pass out from that. King said, what if I do that and something terrible happens to you? Yurenica stood anxiously with folded hands and looked at the king. King of Belcourt asked, if something goes wrong, you could just hug me. Like you did just now. I am absolutely not saying this because I have feelings for him. Absolutely not. All this was going on in the Eurenica's mind. King takes sight taking off something from his clothes. The king said, that wouldn't be hard to do. King also said, but once again, I refuse your request. We can always manually build a fire. And you are an unarmed woman who cannot even hold a sword, and you definitely are terrible at hiding yourself. Those men are seasoned troops of Belcourt. You cannot compare yourself to them. Saying this, the king put his cloak on the girl. After that, King said, I asked you for your cooperation, not your sacrifice. Did I not guarantee your safety and comfort? Unless you want to make the master of Belcourt a liar, it's best you quit this conversation. Princess, this cloak was worn, and the king said, but just in case, stay close to me. The borders of Belcourt are protected by magical ore. Yurenica said, no. I cannot allow it. I can't let a man like this die at a young age because his son uses him as a test subject for black magic. Yurenica was very sad, and she was thinking DeKalb's father. I'm going to save him. The king suddenly said, why do you keep saying So and So's father? Hearing this, the princess became worried and said, you can count on me, Teresa, Yurenica, Fernando Cardona, King of Belcourt, Sergei. Rolf. Finally they lit the fire. Yurenica said, the air in Belcourt is heavier than Livivny. It's so imbued with magic that I felt I could hardly breathe. Yurenica was sitting with the king's back thinking, yet just being next to him helps make it easier to breathe. This man definitely has some kind of miracle cure coursing through his body. Yurenica said, is there no treatment then? Rolf was checking something through magic, so he made the king and the girl sit away from him for Eurenica's safety. Rolf said, nothing has been discovered yet. Keeping his distance for her safety. This is a serious situation. Yurenica thought this is a serious situation. Rolf said loudly, the established theory is that those who are malagilisted to magic usually don't survive past the 5th year of their life. I'm not exactly sure how Princess Yurenica survived this long. The princess was shocked to hear the Rolf and stood behind the king and shouted loudly. Did you say the 5th year? 5th? Rolf replied nervously. 5 years? Yes. That is usually the case. It doesn't matter if they lived somewhere with as little magical influence as possible. Magic isn't something that only flows in the earth. The princess was shocked to hear the words of Rolf. Rolf said magic is one of the two powerful forces that makes up this world. It's not an overstatement to see it's in the very ground we walk and the air we breathe. It's only obvious that it would be difficult for someone maladjusted to magic to survive here. The average person would already be dead. The princess shouted and said, "Don't give me a death sentence with such a calm look on your face." Rolf responded, "I'm simply stating that you're an exception, Your Highness. You made it totally fine into adulthood. That's because the real Urenica was fine until now. The princess said with wet eyes. Since I've been here for almost 9 months at this point. That means the time I have left until my 5th year here is 4 years and 3 months. Saying this, the Urenica started trembling. The princess shouted loudly and jumped up and said, "I'm terminally ill. This is crazy," Rolf said. "Perhaps the blood of the gods that flows through you helps neutralize the effects of magic. If I may carefully offer my conjecture, that is," King said, "divinity and magic." "I can see that," King of Belcourt said. Wait. Calm down, princess. You, Rolf, continue. The princess said in shock. "Divinity." Then Urenica remembering the original novel and began to think, right. This is a world where gods exist. The divinity of the Belcourt royal family was extensively discussed in DeKalb's side story. He's literally the descendant of a god. He's basically like the Jesus of this world, Rolf said. With your divine lineage, the princess can be assured she will be safe in your presence. Rolf said, waving his hand. Even without you calling upon your divinity, there is an energy that surrounds you. Princess Urenica is probably reacting to that energy. Urenica said, "So the king's divinity can help save me and my useless bod." Rolf asked Princess Urenica, "Have you been blessed by the god Loris?" Urenica expressed surprise upon hearing Rolf's question and said, "Blessed by Loris?" King of Belcourt said, "Have you been baptized?" Urenica repeat, "Baptized." Then Urenica began to think something in her mind. As soon as Teresa knew she was pregnant with Bridget, she received a blessing, didn't she? Since royalty tend to receive Loris' blessing even before they're born, I'm sure Urenica was too. Urenica said, "I probably did." The king asked, "Probably?" Urenica said, "I did. I think." The king looked at the princess with suspicion. The Urenica said, laughing, "He's probably not going to ask for my baptismal name since that's a little rude." King said, "In this world, you do not tell anyone your baptismal name, unless they are your parents or your spouse. It is considered to be insulting to the holy name given to you by God." Urenica remembers something and said, "My favorite scene." That's why in the original novel, Alexio tells Bridget his baptismal name when he confesses how he feels for her. Then she started explaining herself and said, "Now's not the time to be thinking about that." King of Belcourt said, "If you were baptized, then it's a possibility, since Livovny is one of the kingdoms where Loris is the patron god." Rolf replied, laughing, "Yes. And maybe the princess was able to survive until now, all because of God's blessing upon her." Urenica was feeling very good, and had a slight smile on her face and said, "Yay. Rolf did nothing wrong." Urenica said, "If anyone's at fault here, it's me for being an interloper in this world." The princess was sitting on the ground and thinking, "Then I'm relieved to hear that, since the capital is on holy ground. I also think that will be a good thing. So, to summarize, I'm a person from another world, so I have no immunity to magic, making me maladjusted to magic. But luckily, Urenica's body was blessed by Loris, so as long as I stay near someone with strong divine energy, I should be alright." Urenica was muttering under her breath and said, "I guess." The king looked at the Urenica with questioning eyes. Urenica sat there and made a plan C in her mind. Plan C. Ship the side characters together. It's a win-win. Once again, Urenica thinks this leaves only one conclusion. Life definitely requires a plan C. Until I find a way to exist normally in this body, I need to stay right next to Eurydion, and to prevent Eurydion from being murdered by his son must not learn black magic. DeKalb learned black magic from his mother. So to stop DeKalb from learning black magic, I just need to stop Eurydion from marrying that woman in the first place. Then, all he has to do is marry me." Seeing the princess sitting in thought like this, the king called out to the princess. Urenica replied in a panic, Yes. A thought came to the princess' mind. It seems a little disrespectful to think about that when he's right here in front of me. But this is perfect. The princess was very happy thinking about all this. They spent the night there in the forest. The next morning, it was a very happy day. The princess smiled at the king, who is a very handsome man, remembering her plan. The king approached the horse, and the Eurenica was also thinking, looking at the king marrying a kind, handsome man. I don't care if I'm suffering from delusions of grandeur, it's nice just thinking about it. The king, seeing the princess lost in thought, asked, "What are you thinking about?" Eurenica replied with a smile, "I was thinking. You're pretty hot for a dad. I'm thinking about marrying you." King remained silent after hearing this. Seeing the king so silent, the princess began to think, why is he staring at me like he's looking at something strange? Memories flashing through like a slideshow. The princess thought, consoling herself, sure, he saw me in a few of my unseemly moments, but I don't think I was that much of a pest. Seeing the king silent, all the princess's dreams were crumbled. She said encouragingly to herself, "I know. Stop thinking about it." The king broke the silence and said, "While you were quiet." The princess got very angry and said, "Extraordinary. You're very strange. This is so humiliating." The princess got angry and started thinking, "That's it. There's no way he'll marry me now. This might be a matter of life and death for me, but there's no reason why the king of Belcourt would marry the princess of some tiny kingdom." The king said, "Princess Eurenica. Come here, princess." The princess stepped forward with great seriousness. The king grabbed the princess by the waist, lifted her up, and placed her on the horse. Eurenica said, "I'm slowly getting leads to this sort of thing." The king ordered his soldiers to say, "Let's go. We'll make it to the capital today, so keep your spirits up, men." The soldiers responded, "Yes, sir." The Eurenica thought, anyway, even if it's impossible for me to marry this man, I need to stop him from marrying a dark magician. I know in the original story, DeKalb, while a monster born of the strongest divine power and the most evil magic. If you want, you can have everything in this world, even the distant world of the gods beyond the Eladetta. As long as you want it. What do you think? Do you want to hold all the power of the world in these two hands to do as you wish? Eurenica thought you could also argue that that woman is at fault for DeKalb's corruption. The princess then rested her head on the king's chest and began to think. She lead her own son down the path of black magic. She must be out of her mind. Then how do I stop this marriage? Then the princess was startled for a moment and began to think, wait, hold on. When does Eurydion get married? I do know that Bridget will be born in 2 months. 7 months pregnant. No, since Teresa didn't get kidnapped, it'll be 3 months from now? Alexio and Bridget are the same age, and DeKalb is 1 year younger than them. Thinking this, Eurenica cried with great sadness in her heart, and Suddy DeKalb is 1 year younger than Bridget? Then even if I was being generous, I only have a year. The king asked you, Your Majesty? What is it? Eurenica was worried. How should I ask him this? The king called out, Princess? Eurenica asked, Your Majesty. Are you unwed? Or are you expecting a child? The king was surprised and replied, What? Eurenica said, I know this is ridiculous. The king replied, First, I'm not married yet. The princess spoke immediately, Yet, king said, Therefore, I obviously don't have a child. And I am definitely not expecting one. The princess fell into thought. Unmarried with no kids is a good thing. King said, You ask peculiar things, princess. And with no provocation. Eurenica think the way he said yet is giving me a bad feeling though. While talking about all this, they reached Belcourt. Eurenica was surprised to see Balakot and said, Wow. Belcourt looks old and historical, Livigny looks more cute in comparison. The king threw cloak on princess. The princess looked at the king with questioning eyes. The king said the gaze of the crowd might be uncomfortable. As soon as the king entered the palace gate, the people started shouting. People were happy to see the king and were saying, Sire, long live Belcourt. The princess hid herself inside the cloak and said, This is a huge crowd. Eurenica said to herself, If it wasn't for his cape, I really would be felt overwhelmed. This man really is so kind-hearted. The king grabbed the Eurenica with both hands and pulled her down from the horse. Meanwhile, the princess was thinking, he's really the perfect husband material. Urenica was very impressed with the king. She was thinking, if I could, I'd kidnap him myself and make him my husband. I mean, not that I really could. But a girl can imagine. A beautiful girl came running towards the king and said, Your Majesty, I'm so relieved you made it back safe and sound. You have no idea how worried I was, Your Majesty. Urenica was shocked to see this girl. The king looked at her and saw tears in her eyes.